by that particular thing and by the leadership that is asking them to work on that research project, because that does lead to the problem of you're not giving them the truth about their question. And if you're not giving someone the truth about their question as a scientist, for one, you're violating the norm of disinterestedness, but then you're also causing the problem of no, the science doesn't say do what you want, but that's a whole other thing. I caught this article of Substack. This is Chris Bray's Substack, and he usually has some interesting things to say with respect to science, and as of course also been taking NSF to task, which I've done also. And I thought this would be interesting to talk about because it I go back and forth on these different things. If you've been around on this channel long enough, you know at one point I talked about a concept called actionable science. And I don't necessarily think it's a bad concept idea. The idea that scientific research can be done with specific decision making in mind to answer the research questions needed to be answered to make that decision to the best that it can be and give the best possible information for that specific decision. That is in the gist of it, actionable science. But at times there's some interesting things that come up when you get at the integration issues and the crossing of disciplines, and of course then the natural question, and maybe I'll do a whole separate video on this, on the role of science in society. What is its role in society? I've talked a lot about what I think the purpose of science is, and the purpose of science is the pursuit of the truth, essentially, with respect to questions using evidence and data and reason and analysis. That's the general, just what I think of when I think of the purpose of science. But what the role of science is in society is a whole entirely different question. And so that would be fun to get into at some point. But so let's see what this is about. The endless drift in scientific policy proclamation, the discourse in which you have to do X on Monday and not X on Tuesday because the science has changed. That's another phrase that I don't like. If you've been a long time viewer on this channel, you know I don't like the phrase believe the science or I follow the science. It is a bullshit phrase. Oh, goodness. Has been, let's be gentle about this, unimpressive. But the day-by-day malleability of science comes from somewhere, and we get some hints about that somewhere from a new field of study called Integration and Implementation Sciences. The increasingly woke National Science Foundation will be hosting a lecture on that topic later this week, and here's what the lecture will cover. So let me go over to that because it make it bigger. So this is a growing convergence. For those of you unfamiliar, NSF has a whole bunch of big topic ideas under which it divides its research. One of them is called growing convergence research, and that's the one under which you get all these kinds of interdisciplinary things with research to get at some of those odd questions, and also things, this is where actionable science would tend to fall in NSF's playbook also. And this will be here, and I think this is a publicly accessible Zoom, so if you're curious and you want to listen in, I'm sure you can. I actually am planning to myself. Synopsis. Integration and Implementation Sciences, I2S, is both an example of convergence research and its development and a field of study that aims to underpin and support convergence research. I2S aims to bring together a range of approaches to tackle complex societal and environmental problems, including systems thinking, interdisciplinary, transdisciplinarity, action research, and post-normal science, in order to develop a common repository of concepts, methods, and processes, as well as to make it easier to use combinations of such approaches in research programs. I2S covers 3 domains. 1. Synthesis of disciplinary and stakeholder knowledge. 2. Understanding and managing unknowns. And 3. Providing integrated research support for policy and practice change. The topics covered in alphabetical order are communication, change, context, decision-making, diversity, integration, research implementation, stakeholder engagement, systems teamwork, and unknowns. So there's a lot there. And I'm not adverse to the idea of doing interdisciplinary research projects. I actually think they can be really helpful in answering some of the really complex interactions questions, between different things and between different fields of study, be it between medicine and urban planning or something along that line. There's a lot of those kinds of questions that you can start to answer. Where this gets interesting for me is, what the hell do you mean by postnormal science. What the hell do we mean here by postnormal science? What the heck is that? In all of this, and I think Chris Bray actually found the answer to that for us. So I will go back to that in a second. But this is where it gets really, really eerie to me what they're thinking about with this, in terms that it could very much be, when you're talking about synthesis of disciplinary and stakeholder knowledge, that gets into the ways of knowing thing to me. And it could be, and admittedly, I don't want to, one thing I will say with Chris is I think he put a little too much into it, but without actually seeing what this is going to be about, which is why I want to watch the lecture on Thursday night myself. So it's going to be interesting. But I do wonder that it opens the door for, instead of being about the truth, it's about community values and meeting all of these other different kinds of things that are not necessarily about the truth at all, which would push scientists who were in this kind of research to violate the norm of disinterestedness. Which, remember, the norm of disinterestedness is you are doing your research without regard to any particular preferential outcome that you may have, something that is, biased from your own worldview. You want to see it come out this way, or you want to see it come out that way. Bear that in mind, that can happen when you start violating that norm. You can have that start to happen when you get really invested in what a stakeholder is doing, and that stakeholder really wants to see this particular outcome because it'll help them this way. There's enormous temptation there to violate then the norm of disinterestedness and make it go a particular way for them, instead of actually doing the research correctly. But let's go back to Chris Bray. Integration and Implementation Sciences is a field of study, singular despite the plural sciences, that focuses on tackling societal and environmental problems. It's a science about causing societal change. See, this is why I don't know, because you can tackle a problem and not necessarily... See, this is why I'm hesitant. It's if you can tackle a problem, if you're tackling a problem, environmental problem or question, you're answering a research question related to that. It doesn't necessarily mean that you are trying to get a particular policy pushed through because you're with that research. In other words, it doesn't mean it's the research that you're not necessarily biasing the research so that you get a particular answer to the problem that you want to get, or a particular answer to the research question so you can then get a particular answer policy-wise. That's why I don't necessarily agree with the assertion that's made here. However, it's a policy-focused field of study, practical politics as a scientific endeavor. It engages stakeholders rather than just trusting experts, and uses action research and postnormal science to arrive at outcomes. So, as I said, I don't necessarily have a problem, because stakeholders can be just about anybody. It doesn't have to be necessarily someone who's in decision-making authority. With respect to policy at a political level, it could be a manager of a park or something like that. It could be a city planner. It could be any number of different things. And you're answering a question that they need answers for. That's the thing about actionable science. So I don't necessarily agree that it's entirely a political endeavor. I agree that it can be, or politics as a scientific endeavor. I agree that it can be if the scientist in question is pushed to violate the norms of disinterestedness in this, and does violate the norms of disinterestedness because they want to see a particular outcome. So I don't necessarily agree with that. Let's take some fog out of that language. The philosopher of science, Silvio Funtowicz, I don't think I wrote that right, says this about postnormal science. In postnormal science, the problems are set and the solutions are evaluated by the criteria of the broader communities that are affected. Nevertheless, postnormal science is a valid form of inquiry, a type of science, and not merely politics or public participation. Postnormal science has the paradoxical feature that in its problem-solving activity, the traditional domination of hard facts over soft values has been inverted. Okay. I would be okay with postnormal, to this point. Hard facts over soft values. That is where it becomes a problem. And I would actually be very much inclined to agree with Chris Bray's assessment then, if that's what it's meant. I actually really want to listen to the webinar to see, is this what is actually meant here. So yeah, soft values of the affected communities prevail over facts. And that is a concern. Like I said, the soft values thing will push a scientist involved in this to violate the norm of disinterestedness because of not wanting to offend the values of the community that they're working in. And that's a problem because you're not giving them reality, which can in turn really mean that they end up making maladaptive decisions or poor decisions that cause problems in a variety of ways. And so that point is entirely valid here that he's talking about. So this is why I don't think this is exactly, I think actionable science would fall under the GCR topic at NSF, but I don't necessarily think this would necessarily be considered actionable science currently. I don't know. I'd have to check it through on some of the actionable science literature. In the longer essay, Funtowicz and a co-author define postnormal science like this. The old dichotomies of facts and values and of knowledge and ignorance are being transcended. Natural systems are recognized as dynamic and complex. Those involving interactions with humanity are emergent, including properties of reflection and contradiction. The science appropriate to this new condition will be based on the assumptions of unpredictability, incomplete control, and a plurality of legitimate perspectives. This emerging science fosters a new methodology that helps guide its development. In this uncertainty, uncertainty is not banished, but is managed, and values are not presupposed, but are made explicit. The model for scientific argument is not a formalized deduction, but an interactive dialogue. Okay. If it does just diverge down to just being an interactive dialogue, that's a problem, because there has to be some formalized deducing going on there. You have to be able to run the experiment and get some results and what have you that are what they are and make some inferences about them without being influenced by the community. The questions of interest could certainly be asked by a community. We don't understand why this thing is happening. Can you help us figure it out so we can make this decision? That's totally appropriate. But if there's a desire for a specific outcome, that's a problem. And that's why I'd have a problem with the interactive dialogue thing too. So the National Science Foundation, an agenda-setting juggernaut in the funding and shaping of academic science, is hosting discussions about science in which science is depicted as a politically focused field of inquiry that replaces the old ideas about data and knowledge with a socially contingent interactive dialogue, and soft values prevail over hard facts. Expect the science has changed to become a routine political declaration. So that's Chris Bray's piece. You have to go back with this to thinking about what is the proper role for science in society. And that's not an easy question to answer in all of this. There is some opinion now that with things like this, the proper role of science in society is to be more invested and more involved in what the decisions are. But that does open the possibility that you get into this kind of thing that Chris is talking about, where it is very politically driven research. And that's a really, really bad idea. I recoiled at that when I was confronted with that when I was applying for my PhD programs, because I saw a program that was just like, yeah, and you're going to be working with these politicians. Like, what the no, I'm not going to do that. But at the same time, there's a tremendous balancing act there that has to be done, because I do think there is a role for science in society. I don't have a problem with scientists working with different communities. I do have a problem when they let their research be driven by the values of the community that they're working in, by that particular thing, and by the leadership that is asking them to work on that research project, because that does lead to the problem of you're not giving them the truth about their question. And if you're not giving someone the truth about their question as a scientist, for one, you're violating the norm of disinterestedness. But then you're also causing the problem of you're going to give them bad information and they'll make poor decisions because of it. That is why scientists in society have to be really mindful of their role. And it's why some of these things with NSF do give me some pause for thought and concerns. That's it. Let me know what you think on the way out the door. Hit the like button, comment on the video, share the video, subscribe to the channel, all that good jazz. And until next time, I'm Adrian, and I hope you all stay curious, my friends.